sweltering summer of 1878, when yellow fever swept through New Orleans like the angel of death itself, something far more sinister than disease was stalking the French Quarter. What should have been a time of community solidarity and mutual aid became the backdrop for one of the most calculated acts of mass murder in American history. The Rousseau family, pillars of New Orleans society and owners of the largest shipping consortium in the Gulf, used the epidemic not just to eliminate their business rivals, but to perfect a system of ritualistic killing that would claim over 40 lives before the fever finally broke. For nearly 150 years, the true scope of their crimes has remained hidden in sealed church records, buried police reports, and the terrified whispers of survivors who were too afraid to speak. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about one of America's deadliest epidemics and reveal how easily evil can masquerade as charity during times of crisis. Before we dive into this disturbing chapter of New Orleans history, if you're fascinated by dark tales that mainstream historians won't touch, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We uncover the most chilling stories hidden in America's past. And I'm curious, have you ever experienced a natural disaster or epidemic? Tell us in the comments how communities really behave when civilization starts to break down. Now, let's enter the plague house and discover what the Rousseau family was really doing behind their mansion's wrought iron gates. The Rousseau family mansion stood like a Gothic fortress on Royal Street, its 3 stories of dark stone and wrought iron balconies casting shadows that seemed to swallow the gaslight whole. By 1878, the family had dominated New Orleans shipping for over 60 years, controlling the flow of goods between the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. Their fleet of steam vessels carried everything from cotton and sugar to the more exotic and profitable cargoes that didn't appear on any official manifests. Auguste Rousseau, the family patriarch at 62, commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout the Crescent City. His steel-gray eyes and commanding presence made even hardened riverboat captains nervous during business negotiations. But it was his wife, Celeste, who truly embodied the family's capacity for calculated cruelty. At 58, she maintained an elegant facade that concealed one of the most ruthless minds in New Orleans business circles. The couple's 5 children had been raised to view the world as their personal domain to be controlled and exploited. Philippe, the eldest at 34, managed the family's legitimate shipping operations with ruthless efficiency. His brother Antoine, 32, oversaw their more questionable ventures, including arms smuggling and human trafficking. Daughter Marguerite, 29, had married into another prominent family but remained deeply involved in the Rousseau enterprises. The youngest sons, Claude and Henri, aged 26 and 24 respectively, served as enforcers when business disputes required more direct solutions. The family's mansion served multiple purposes beyond providing luxurious living quarters. The basement had been converted into a sophisticated laboratory where Dr. Jean-Baptiste Trémé, the family's personal physician and longtime accomplice, conducted experiments that would have horrified legitimate medical professionals. Dr. Trémé, a thin man with nervous hands and bloodshot eyes, had been expelled from medical school in Paris for conducting unauthorized experiments on cadavers. The Rousseaus had rescued him from destitution and provided him with unlimited resources to pursue his darker interests. The laboratory contained equipment for distilling various poisons, cultivating disease cultures, and preparing drug compounds that could induce hallucinations, paralysis, or death depending on the dosage. Most importantly, Dr. Trémé had spent years perfecting methods for concentrating and preserving yellow fever-infected blood and tissue, creating what he called his divine essence, a biological weapon that could be deployed with surgical precision against selected targets. By the spring of 1878, the Rousseau family faced their greatest business challenge in decades. A coalition of rival shipping families, led by the ambitious Boudreaux clan, had formed an alliance designed to break the Rousseau monopoly on Gulf trade. They had secured backing from northern investors and were planning to establish competing shipping routes that would devastate Rousseau profits. Traditional business tactics had failed to stop them, and the family realized that more drastic measures would be necessary. The solution came to Celeste Rousseau during one of her regular consultations with Madame Lavinia, a voodoo priestess who operated from a hidden temple in the Trémé neighborhood. Lavinia, a tall woman with intricate scarification covering her dark skin, had served as spiritual advisor to the Rousseau family for over 20 years. Her knowledge of herbs, poisons, and psychological manipulation had proven invaluable in numerous family crises. During their meeting in March 1878, Madame Lavinia described a ritual she called the Cleansing Covenant, which supposedly had been used by secret societies in Haiti to eliminate enemies while appearing to honor the spirits of disease and death. The ceremony involved the systematic poisoning of rival families while conducting elaborate rituals designed to channel the power of epidemic diseases. Participants would consume specially prepared compounds that heightened their psychological connection to death and disease while protecting them from the biological agents they were unleashing on their victims. Celeste Rousseau was immediately intrigued by the possibilities. A yellow fever epidemic would provide perfect cover for eliminating business rivals while appearing to be tragic victims of natural disaster. The family's wealth and political connections would ensure they had access to the best medical care and preventive measures, while their enemies would be left to die in the overcrowded charity hospitals. The planning for what the family privately called their divine retribution began immediately. Dr. Treem started cultivating yellow fever cultures using blood samples from early cases that spring, while Madame Lavinia prepared the ritual components needed for the cleansing covenant ceremony. The family identified 37 primary targets, including the heads of competing shipping families, key politicians who opposed their interests, and several federal officials who had been investigating their smuggling operations. The yellow fever epidemic of 1878 began in New Orleans during the second week of May, when several cases appeared simultaneously in multiple neighborhoods. City health officials, already overwhelmed by the rapid spread, failed to notice that the initial victims included a disproportionate number of individuals who had recently opposed Rousseau business interests. The disease spread with unusual speed and seemed to target specific families and businesses with uncanny precision. The Boudreaux shipping family lost 6 members in the first 2 weeks, including patriarch Marcel Boudreaux and his 2 eldest sons. Their main warehouse mysteriously caught fire during the same period, destroying millions of dollars in goods and shipping records. City Councilman Robert Thibodeau, who had been investigating Rousseau's smuggling operations, died along with his wife and 3 children. Federal Customs Inspector William Hayes, who had seized several Rousseau vessels the previous year, perished along with his entire family when yellow fever struck their Garden District mansion. While their enemies died in agony, the Rousseau family appeared blessed with remarkable immunity. They not only avoided contracting yellow fever but seemed to thrive during the crisis, expanding their operations to fill the void left by their deceased competitors. They publicly attributed their good fortune to their charitable works and pious devotion, donating generously to yellow fever relief efforts and opening their mansion as a temporary hospital for wealthy victims. But behind the facade of Christian charity, something far more sinister was occurring in the Rousseau mansion. The family had converted their ballroom into what appeared to be a hospital ward for fever victims, but the patients who entered this facility were not seeking treatment. They were unwitting participants in a massive experiment in biological warfare and ritualistic murder. Dr. Treem used his medical credentials to gain access to homes throughout the city, ostensibly to provide treatment for yellow fever victims. In reality, he was systematically infecting targeted individuals with concentrated doses of the disease while appearing to offer medical care. His black leather medical bag contained syringes filled with yellow fever cultures, bottles of contaminated water disguised as medicine, and packets of infected mosquitoes that could be released in victims' homes. The doctor's methods were diabolically clever. He would arrive at a target's home claiming to have been called by concerned friends or neighbors. After examining the supposedly healthy family members, he would inject them with what he claimed was a preventive vaccine but was actually concentrated yellow fever virus. Within days, the entire household would be stricken with the disease, and Dr. Treem would return to provide treatment that actually hastened their deaths. The most disturbing aspect of the Rousseau family's campaign was the ritualistic element that accompanied each murder. Following Madame Lavinia's instructions, family members would gather in their mansion's basement laboratory every 3 days to perform the cleansing covenant ceremony. The ritual involved consuming a potent mixture of Caribbean herbs, laudanum, and what Lavinia claimed was powdered bone from yellow fever victims. Under the influence of these substances, participants experienced vivid hallucinations and felt a profound sense of connection to the epidemic raging outside their walls. They believed they were channeling the power of Baron Samedi, the voodoo spirit of death, and that their victims' suffering was feeding their own strength and prosperity. The ceremony culminated with each family member drinking a toast made from wine mixed with yellow fever-infected blood, a practice they believed made them immune to the disease while binding them together in shared culpability. The psychological effects of these regular drug-induced rituals were profound and disturbing. Family members began to see themselves as divine instruments of justice, cleansing New Orleans of unworthy competitors and obstacles to their destiny. They developed an almost religious fervor about their mission and started keeping detailed records of their victims, complete with photographs and personal belongings taken from the homes of the deceased. Philippe Rousseau became obsessed with creating what he called a gallery of the cleansed, filling an entire room in the mansion with portraits of their victims arranged like a macabre shrine. Each portrait was accompanied by detailed notes about the person's crimes against the family and descriptions of their final moments as reported by Dr. Treem. The family would often spend hours studying these displays, reinforcing their belief that they were performing necessary work in service to higher powers. As the epidemic reached its peak in July 1878, the Rousseau family's confidence grew to dangerous levels. They began targeting victims beyond their original business rivals, including anyone who showed insufficient respect or gratitude for their charitable efforts. Social rivals, former servants who knew too much about family secrets, and even distant relatives who might inherit family assets were systematically eliminated through Dr. Treem's medical visits. The family's youngest son, Henri, proved particularly enthusiastic about the killing spree. He began volunteering at overcrowded public hospitals, where he would identify additional victims among patients and their families. Under the guise of providing comfort to the dying, Henri would gather information about potential targets and sometimes administered fatal doses of poison to patients who were beginning to recover from yellow fever. But the Rousseaus' growing boldness would soon attract attention from an unexpected source. Sister Mary Catherine, a nun who had been ministering to yellow fever victims throughout the city, began noticing disturbing patterns in the epidemic's spread and the behavior of certain prominent families who claimed to be helping with relief efforts. Sister Mary Catherine had arrived in New Orleans from Montreal just as the epidemic began, bringing with her extensive experience in treating infectious diseases and a sharp eye for detecting deception and fraud. Unlike local medical professionals who were overwhelmed by the crisis, she maintained detailed records of patient symptoms, family histories, and the circumstances surrounding each death. By August, the nun had documented several troubling coincidences. Families that opposed certain business interests seemed disproportionately affected by the disease, while their competitors remained mysteriously healthy. She also noted that Dr. Treem appeared at an unusual number of homes just before entire families became ill, and his treatment seemed to worsen rather than improve patients' conditions. Sister Mary Catherine's investigations led her to request a meeting with Archbishop Napoleon Joseph Perchy, the highest Catholic authority in New Orleans. The nun presented evidence suggesting systematic murder disguised as epidemic disease, and she specifically named the Rousseau family as suspects in what she believed was the largest mass murder in American history. Archbishop Perchy was initially skeptical of such extraordinary accusations, but Sister Mary Catherine's documentation was compelling and detailed. More importantly, the nun had discovered physical evidence that supported her theories. While ministering to dying patients in the Rousseau Mansion's charity ward, she had observed strange rituals being conducted in the basement and had managed to collect samples of the drug compounds being used in these ceremonies. The samples, when examined by a chemist loyal to the church, revealed a complex mixture of hallucinogenic plants, opium derivatives, and what appeared to be biological matter that could transmit yellow fever. The discovery convinced Archbishop Perchy that Sister Mary Catherine's accusations were not only credible but represented a threat to the entire Catholic community in New Orleans. However, confronting the Rousseau family directly would be extremely dangerous and potentially futile. The family's wealth and political connections made them virtually untouchable through normal legal channels, and their apparent immunity to yellow fever suggested they possessed resources that could protect them from conventional justice. The Archbishop decided that more subtle methods would be necessary to stop their killing spree. Working with Sister Mary Catherine and a small group of trusted clergy, Archbishop Perchy developed a plan to infiltrate the Rousseau operation and gather evidence that could eventually be used to destroy the family's power and wealth. The plan centered around exploiting the family's reliance on Madame Lavinia's spiritual guidance and their belief in the supernatural aspects of their cleansing covenant ritual. Sister Mary Catherine would pose as a recently arrived Haitian refugee with knowledge of advanced voodoo practices that could enhance the family's power over disease and death. Using her medical knowledge and access to church resources, she would gain the family's trust by providing them with apparently magical substances and rituals that actually contained safeguards designed to protect their victims and ultimately expose their crimes. The infiltration began in early September, when Madame Lavinia introduced Sister Mary Catherine, now calling herself Marie Dessalines, to Celeste Rousseau as a powerful mambo who had fled Haiti after angering colonial authorities with her supernatural abilities. The nun's genuine knowledge of Caribbean folk medicine and her convincing portrayal of a traumatized refugee quickly earned the family's interest and trust. Marie Dessalines claimed that she had learned advanced techniques for channeling epidemic diseases that surpassed anything practiced in Louisiana voodoo traditions. She offered to enhance the family's cleansing covenant ritual with new elements that would multiply their power over yellow fever and ensure their complete immunity while making their enemies' deaths even more agonizing and spiritually satisfying. The enhancements that Sister Mary Catherine introduced to the ritual were carefully designed to reduce its effectiveness while appearing to strengthen it. She replaced Dr. Treem's yellow fever cultures with harmless bacterial samples that would not transmit disease, and she substituted the family's hallucinogenic drug mixture with compounds that would create vivid experiences while actually reducing their capacity for violence and rational planning. Most importantly, she convinced the family that their spiritual power would be greatly enhanced if they performed the ritual in a sacred location outside their mansion. She identified an abandoned plantation house in the Bayou country that she claimed had been the site of powerful voodoo ceremonies for over a century. The isolated location would provide the perfect setting for the final phase of Archbishop Percy's plan. As September progressed and cooler weather began to slow the yellow fever epidemic naturally, the Rousseau family grew increasingly desperate to complete their divine mission before the disease disappeared entirely. They had eliminated most of their original targets, but Celeste Rousseau had compiled a new list of over 60 individuals who she believed needed to be cleansed from New Orleans society. The family planned a grand finale to their cleansing covenant ceremonies, a massive ritual that would supposedly grant them permanent power over disease and death while eliminating all remaining obstacles to their complete domination of New Orleans commerce. Marie Dessalines encouraged this grandiose thinking, suggesting that the ritual should include not just the family members but also their key associates and accomplices. On the night of September 21, 1878, the Rousseau family gathered at the abandoned plantation house for what they believed would be their greatest triumph. In attendance were all 5 family members, Dr. Treem, Madame Lavinia, and 6 other individuals who had assisted in their campaign of murder. They brought with them their ritual implements, drug compounds, and the preserved remains of their first victims, planning to consume these in a ceremony that would supposedly make them immortal instruments of divine justice. But Sister Mary Catherine had prepared a very different conclusion to their story. Working with Archbishop Percy and a small group of federal marshals who had been investigating the epidemic's suspicious patterns, she had transformed the abandoned plantation into a trap that would finally bring the Rousseau family to justice. The ceremony began at midnight in the plantation house's main hall, a cavernous room lit by dozens of black candles and decorated with symbols that Marie Dessalines claimed would channel the power of Baron Samedi himself. The participants consumed their enhanced drug mixture and began reciting incantations that they believed would grant them ultimate power over life and death. As the substances took effect, the participants experienced the most intense hallucinations of their ritualistic career. They saw visions of their victims rising from the dead to thank them for their liberation, and they felt themselves transforming into divine beings with the power to reshape reality according to their will. In their altered state, they confessed in detail to every murder they had committed, believing they were proudly recounting their sacred accomplishments to assembled spirits. Unknown to the participants, Sister Mary Catherine had arranged for their confessions to be recorded by federal investigators hidden throughout the plantation house. More importantly, she had replaced their protective drug compounds with substances that would make them extremely vulnerable to yellow fever infection rather than immune to it. As dawn broke over the bayou, the Rousseau family and their accomplices found themselves experiencing the first symptoms of yellow fever. The disease they had used as a weapon against so many innocent victims was now coursing through their own bodies, and their carefully maintained immunity had been transformed into fatal susceptibility. Dr. Treem was the first to realize what had happened, recognizing the early signs of yellow fever infection in himself and the other participants. In his drug-weakened state, he tried to explain to the family that they had been betrayed and poisoned, but the others were too deep in their hallucinogenic experience to comprehend the danger they faced. Over the following days, as the full horror of their situation became clear, the Rousseau family members turned on each other with the same vicious paranoia they had directed toward their business rivals. Celeste accused Auguste of deliberately exposing them to infection, while Philippe blamed Antoine for trusting the mysterious Marie Dessalines. The family's unity, built on shared guilt and mutual dependence, crumbled as they faced their own deaths. Sister Mary Catherine maintained her disguise until the end, appearing to provide spiritual comfort to the dying family members while secretly documenting their final confessions and ensuring that evidence of their crimes was preserved for posterity. The federal marshals remained hidden until all the participants had succumbed to the disease, preventing any possibility of escape or retaliation. The official cause of death for all participants was listed as yellow fever, with no mention of their confession to systematic murder or their role in spreading the epidemic. The church and federal authorities agreed that revealing the full truth would create panic and potentially undermine public health efforts during the final phase of the epidemic. However, detailed records of the family's crimes were sealed in church archives and federal files, creating a comprehensive documentation of one of the most calculated mass murders in American history. These records remained classified for over a century, protected by laws designed to prevent the information from inspiring copycat crimes or destabilizing public confidence in medical authority. The Russo family's shipping empire was quietly liquidated by federal receivers, with the assets distributed to victims' families and yellow fever relief efforts. Their Royal Street mansion was sold to the Catholic Church, which converted it into an orphanage for children who had lost their parents to the epidemic. The basement laboratory where Dr. Treem had prepared his biological weapons was sealed permanently and later filled with concrete. But the family's influence on New Orleans didn't end with their deaths. Investigation of their business records revealed connections to criminal organizations throughout the Gulf Coast region, including other families that had used similar methods to eliminate rivals during various epidemic diseases. The techniques developed by Dr. Treem and Madame Lavinia appeared to have been shared with associates in Mobile, Galveston, and Havana, creating a network of biological warfare that may have claimed hundreds of additional victims. Sister Mary Catherine remained in New Orleans for another year, working with church authorities and federal investigators to track down other members of this criminal network. Her efforts led to the discovery of similar operations in Texas and Florida, where prominent families had used cholera and typhoid fever to eliminate business competitors and political opponents. The nun's final report, filed with the Vatican in 1879, described what she called an epidemic of evil that had infected wealthy families throughout the American South and Gulf region. According to her investigation, the Russo family's techniques had been taught to at least 12 other criminal organizations, creating a widespread system of biological terrorism that exploited public health crises for private gain. Most disturbing was Sister Mary Catherine's discovery that these techniques had been used not just during the 1878 yellow fever epidemic, but during previous disease outbreaks stretching back to the 1850s. Families throughout the region had been systematically murdering their rivals for decades, disguising their crimes as natural disasters and using the chaos of epidemics to expand their wealth and power. The Vatican classified Sister Mary Catherine's report at the highest level of secrecy and ordered that no copies be made or distributed without papal approval. Church authorities feared that revealing the extent of epidemic-related murders would destroy public confidence in medical care and potentially inspire additional biological warfare attacks. Sister Mary Catherine herself was transferred to a contemplative order in France, where she spent the remainder of her life in prayer and silence. Her knowledge of the Russo family's crimes and the broader network of epidemic murders died with her in 1923, taking to the grave secrets that could have revolutionized understanding of American public health history. The abandoned plantation house where the final ritual took place was burned to the ground in 1881, officially due to structural damage from neglect but actually to eliminate any remaining evidence of the confrontation. Local residents reported strange lights and unexplained sounds from the ruins for several years afterward, but these accounts were dismissed as folklore generated by the location's tragic association with yellow fever deaths. By 1885, the yellow fever epidemic of 1878 had become just another entry in New Orleans medical history, remembered as a natural disaster that claimed over 4,000 lives but left no trace of the systematic murder that had contributed to its devastating toll. The Russo family name faded from public memory, and their mansion became just another historic building in the French Quarter with no indication of the horrors that had been planned and executed within its walls. However, researchers who know where to look can still find traces of the family's crimes in archived documents and sealed records. Medical historians have noted unusual patterns in the 1878 epidemic spread, including the disproportionate impact on certain families and businesses, but these observations have been attributed to social and economic factors rather than deliberate biological warfare. The techniques developed by Dr. Treem and Madame Lavinia, combining medical knowledge with psychological manipulation and ritualistic violence, represented a level of criminal sophistication that was far ahead of its time. Their methods of cultivating disease cultures, targeting victims through medical care, and using religious ceremonies to maintain group cohesion would not seem out of place in modern biological terrorism or cult behavior. Perhaps most chilling is the realization that the Russo family's success depended on the trust and respect they commanded as pillars of New Orleans society. Their wealth, social position, and apparent charitable works provided perfect cover for mass murder, allowing them to eliminate dozens of victims while being praised as heroes of epidemic relief efforts. The story of the Plague House Covenant serves as a dark reminder that some of history's greatest monsters have operated not from the shadows, but from positions of respect and authority within their communities. The Rousseau family's crimes were possible precisely because they appeared to be everything that decent society valued: wealthy, charitable, pious, and dedicated to helping their neighbors during times of crisis. In 1923, 45 years after the yellow fever epidemic, construction workers renovating the former Rousseau mansion discovered a sealed room in the basement that had somehow been missed during the original investigation. Inside this hidden chamber, they found Dr. Treem's complete laboratory notes, including detailed recipes for biological weapons and step-by-step instructions for conducting the cleansing covenant ritual. Most shocking was the discovery of a leather-bound journal that Celeste Rousseau had apparently kept throughout their campaign of murder. The journal contained not only detailed accounts of each victim's death, but also philosophical reflections on the family's divine mission and plans for expanding their techniques to other cities and epidemics. According to the journal, the Rousseau family had been in contact with similar criminal organizations in Charleston, Savannah, and Memphis, sharing information about biological warfare techniques and coordinating their activities to avoid detection by federal authorities. The 1878 New Orleans epidemic was apparently just one theater in a much larger campaign of systematic murder that stretched across the entire American South. The discovery prompted a secret federal investigation that continued until 1927, ultimately identifying evidence of epidemic-related murders in over 30 cities throughout the southeastern United States. While most of the perpetrators had died decades earlier, the investigation revealed a level of organized biological terrorism that dwarfed anything previously known in American criminal history. However, the results of this investigation were classified at the highest levels and have never been released to the public. Federal authorities apparently decided that revealing the extent of epidemic-related murders would undermine public confidence in medical care and government disease control efforts. The evidence remains sealed in federal archives, accessible only to researchers with special security clearances. Today, the former Rousseau mansion operates as a boutique hotel in the French Quarter, with no indication of its dark history. Guests sleep peacefully in rooms where mass murderers once planned their next victims, and the basement where Dr. Treem prepared his biological weapons now houses the hotel's wine cellar and spa facilities. Local tour guides occasionally mention the mansion's connection to yellow fever relief efforts, presenting the Rousseau family as tragic victims of the 1878 epidemic rather than its architects. The true story remains buried in archives and sealed records, known only to a handful of historians who have dedicated their careers to uncovering America's darkest secrets. But sometimes, late at night when the French Quarter grows quiet, hotel guests report strange sounds from the basement levels and the faint scent of laboratory chemicals that has no apparent source. Whether these phenomena represent genuine supernatural activity or simply the power of suggestion, they serve as reminders that some crimes leave permanent stains on the places where they occurred. The Plague House Covenant represents more than just a historical curiosity or an example of 19th century criminal behavior. It demonstrates how quickly civilized society can break down when faced with crisis, and how easily evil can disguise itself as virtue when people are desperate for leadership and hope. The techniques used by the Rousseau family, exploiting public health emergencies, targeting vulnerable populations, using respected social positions as cover for criminal activity, remain relevant in the modern world. Their story serves as a warning about the dangers of concentrating too much trust in wealthy and powerful families during times of crisis, and the importance of maintaining skeptical oversight of those who claim to be helping society's most vulnerable members. Most importantly, the Plague House Covenant reminds us that history's greatest monsters are often not the obvious villains we expect, but the respected pillars of society who use their positions of trust to commit crimes that would be impossible for ordinary criminals to imagine or execute. What do you think drove the Rousseau family to such systematic evil? Was it simply greed